Hey everybody, Steve Bowman here. So thank you for joining our Live Better series webinar. Today we are going to talk about combating cardiovascular disease. And simply put, we're going to really talk about a step-by-step approach to not only prevent, but also to reverse cardiovascular disease. So thank you guys. Just so you know, we'll be recording tonight's presentation, and at the end, we will be able to talk and answer any questions that you guys may have. Okay, so when we start our presentations, typically what we want to do is just talk about a little quote here and kind of get thinking about the topic. So this doctor is known for many quotes, and he has been working with people with cardiovascular disease for many, many years. And what he always says is some people think that a plant-based diet is extreme. Meanwhile, there's tons of people that have their chests ripped open, cut open. You take an artery from your leg, you cut open your leg, and you patch that all together. And that is a massive, massive, high invasive surgery. That's extreme. Eating more fruits and vegetables and maybe holding the chicken or the cheese is not necessarily as extreme as we often think when we put it in comparison. All right. So with that being said, let's level set and focus on where you are right now. So we always start every webinar with a couple of reflection questions. So first and foremost, why do you want to live healthy? What are some key factors for you? Is it so you can be, you can live longer, you can live a better quality of life? By being healthy, it will enable you to be a better mother or a better grandmother or father or son. What is it for you that is really your key driver? All right. So another question here is, what are 3 things specifically that you know you need to change? So let's just think about those before we dive in. What are the things that you know without a doubt? Yeah, I need to work on this, or I need to work on that. All right. So the good news is, and we're going to talk about some of the challenges of cardiovascular disease and really what is cardiovascular disease and all the corresponding pieces of it. But the good news here, and I always like to encourage and share the hope, lifestyle is a game changer. It is essential. And what we have to understand when it comes to most health challenges, lifestyle is the cause. And so whatever the cause, you can also flip that and think it's also the solution. So if I know the cause, I know the solution. So with that being said, it really comes down to 6 areas: improving our sleep, eating well, moving more, stressing less, cultivating and strengthening our relationships, and avoiding risky substances. This essentially these are the key factors as to how we can prevent, treat, and reverse close to 85% of most chronic health problems. 80 to 85, sometimes even higher. So people often think, well, it's genetics. I can't do anything about it. It's lifestyle. I mean, it's genetics. And in my lifestyle, I make some changes, but nothing happens. Sometimes it's because we don't change enough. Oftentimes we might make a little improvement over here, but we oftentimes don't go far enough, or we don't stay with it long enough to where we experience those benefits. So let's talk about what cardiovascular disease is. All right. So first and foremost, it's described as diseases of the blood vessels and the heart. So we know it most commonly when we hear high blood pressure, high cholesterol, coronary artery disease, also known as heart disease, heart failure, stroke, and then certain congenital defects. That is basically cardiovascular disease. So when you hear the term heart disease, it's typically referring to coronary artery disease. All right. When you hear the term high blood pressure, it's the pressure on the artery walls. And then when you hear, heart failure, it's essentially a heart attack where you don't get enough oxygen to the heart. And therefore, the heart itself starts to die without oxygen. And then a stroke is essentially a brain attack. It's the same thing as a heart attack. It's just blood flow is not getting to the brain as opposed to the heart. And when we do not get blood flow, we do not get oxygen. So when it comes down to it, really the way we can prevent, treat, and reverse cardiovascular disease is these 3 clinical indicators right here: blood pressure, cholesterol, and glucose. All right. So the American Heart Association, as well as a lot of other medical, organizations, they always talk about these 3 clinical indicators as the 3 most important for preventing and treating cardiovascular disease. And so here's the good news. Everything with cholesterol, blood pressure, and glucose, for the great majority of people, it's within our personal control. But here's the key word here, or the key phrase: without medication. Without medication. That's the goal. If you tell me, oh, my cholesterol is great, and then you tell me you're on 2 cholesterol lowering medications, then it's not really great, because if you're not on the meds, where's that number? All right. So we have to be really focused on having these numbers really in a good range without medication. So fasting glucose, we really want to be under 100. Optimal blood pressure in America, we often say 120/80, but we really want to challenge ourselves to go even further and maybe shoot for 110/70, because a lot of research around the world is showing that people that are free of heart disease are typically even lower. The lower, the better. And then having optimal blood cholesterol. Again, in America, we often recommend and say under 200, you're good. But really, most people don't know that they're still at risk when they're between 150 and 200 for total cholesterol. So our goal is to be under 150. So again, under 150 for our blood cholesterol, under 120/80, even better under 110/70 for blood pressure. And then having a fasting glucose, which is our blood sugar, having that under 100, ideally even a little lower than that, under 90 even. All right. So when it comes to heart disease, it's important for us to understand that it is the #1 cause of death in the United States. It's incredible. And what's crazy here is, think about some of these stats at the bottom, some facts. Every 25 seconds, somebody has a coronary event in America. Every 39 seconds, somebody dies from heart disease. Every 39 seconds. So in today's webinar, about 50 people plus in America will die of heart disease. Each year, 785,000 Americans will have their first heart attack. And here's the sad reality: is of people that have their heart attack, the American medical groups do a very good job of helping people when they get quick care. But of most people that have a heart attack, it kills usually about 1/3 or more of those people. So 1 out of every 3 people do not survive their first heart attack. All right. So bottom line, when it comes down to it, we need to understand that how we live our life is the primary risk factor. So again, if our lifestyle is the cause, our lifestyle becomes the solution. Okay. So you might think, all right, so I know that the clinical indicators are optimal blood pressure, cholesterol, and fasting glucose. What do I do? Let's get down to that. And that's where we're going to focus the majority of our time. It really comes down to 4 key areas: not smoking, eating well, being physically active, and reaching and maintaining a healthy weight. Now, smoking has always been one of the primary causes of poor cardiovascular health. Essentially, what you have to understand here is it constricts the arteries, restricting blood flow, and it hardens the arteries. It causes what's called arteriosclerosis. So it causes the narrowing, and it causes the hardening, and it causes pressure within. That is not an ideal setting for our cardiovascular system and our arteries and our veins and all of that. Eating well, and I use air quotes here, eating well oftentimes is very confusing for people. 90% of Americans think they eat well. Unfortunately, 70% of Americans are not in good health. So there's something wrong with our perception of what healthy eating is as compared to our current health status. Eating well, and we're going to talk about this, is eating more unprocessed plant-based foods and less of the more refined products, the processed foods, limiting the animal products, dairy, milk, eggs, fish, things like that. Eating things that add value to human health. That is the way I want you to understand eating well. Eating foods that add value to human health. That's how we define it. Next on the list would be being physically active. Now, it doesn't say, running a marathon every month or running 10 miles a day or hiking a mountain, but basically it's just being physically active, gardening, walking, doing household things, getting around, getting out and about. And then lastly, reaching and maintaining a healthy weight is imperative for our cardiovascular system. Think of it like this: if you had a tiny little Hyundai, you wouldn't want to pull a 24-foot trailer. You don't see those cars pulling with a hitch, right? You don't see them pulling a trailer. If you ever do, you know that car is going to break down quick. Same thing goes with our body. We need to get the excess weight off of our body. So not only our joints and our overall health will improve, but it's less pressure on our heart. Think of it in that example. That's our engine. Our heart is the engine. All right. So question for all of you is, why do you want to address cardiovascular disease? Why do you want to make cardiovascular disease go away, to significantly decrease your risk of it? All right. So focus on your why as we go further. All right. So this is a comprehensive list of all kinds of different things you can do to really combat cardiovascular disease. And we're going to go through a bunch of these in all of the three areas we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about cholesterol, blood pressure, and glucose. You're going to see a lot of similarities. You're going to see that, oh, what's good for cholesterol is good for diabetes. What's good for blood pressure is good for cholesterol. You're going to see a lot of overlap here. And it's important for you to get the key reflection there and think, okay, wow, this is really incredible how if I make these changes for this area, it affects my entire health. All right. So what's good for one is good for another. And that's important that we focus on that. All right. So we're going to talk about that. Eating well, eating the rainbow, which is, basically understanding that you want to eat as much color as possible. Eating the rainbow means eat as many fruits and vegetables you can in a day. And I always say, if you can aim for 8 to 10 servings of fruits and vegetables every day, that's a really, really great place to start. Not only is it incredibly good for you and it thins your blood and it provides all kinds of health benefits, but it also displaces unhealthy food. So when you eat more good, you eat less unhealthy. We also want to avoid and limit animal products because they're high fat, extremely high, and they cause inflammation and they cause all kinds of challenges to human health, especially from a cardiovascular perspective. We want to fuel with fiber. We want to eat as much fiber as possible. Fiber comes from unprocessed plant-based foods. That's essentially where you get fiber. That's the only place you can get it, unless it's added through supplementation or refining, processing of foods. But really, it comes from plant roughage. We want to moderate sodium intake. It's dramatic for, decreasing our blood pressure, and the less processed foods and animal-based foods, naturally, we're going to consume a lot less sodium. Even if you're putting hot sauce on a lot of stuff, you're still going to notice that the sodium intake will come down significantly. We want to be sure to get good fats and avoid the bad fats. Simply put, we want to avoid dietary cholesterol. And the best way we can do that is by avoiding animal products. Cholesterol doesn't come from anything other than an animal product. Our body makes it. We do not have to consume a single milligram of dietary cholesterol. All right, so we don't need to eat it. And when we eat it, and the American diet is filled with high cholesterol, high trans fat, high saturated fat, when we limit and avoid these things, what we notice is our cardiovascular system cleans up. Same thing goes with oils. We want to keep them at bay and minimize them as best we can. We also want to eat lower glycemic index foods, which we'll talk about when we get to blood glucose. So take a look here at this chart before we move forward. So this is an example of what cholesterol looks like within our arteries. So essentially it builds up in our arteries and it obstructs blood flow. And when it obstructs blood flow, it obstructs oxygen. The name of the game in prevention of cardiovascular disease is optimal blood pressure, not a lot of pressure on your artery walls, but good blood flow throughout your entire body. That will help with everything with our health. So what do we do? What are some things that we can do to really start to help ourselves out? Okay, so when we're looking at it, now this is just specific to cholesterol, but again, keep in mind, you're going to see these on other areas as well. Remember, at the beginning, we talked about what is an optimal blood cholesterol level. And the target here for all of us is to be under 150. That's the goal. Under 150 is where our blood cholesterol should be. In America, if you go to the doctor and you're at 195, they're going to be like, great job. Excellent. Keep up the good work. But that's not good. 1/3 of heart attacks and strokes happen for people whose cholesterol is between 150 and 200. 1/3 of heart attacks and strokes. So why wouldn't our doctors tell us to go a step further and be free of risk, not lower risk? Lower risk does not equal good. It's better than higher risk, but we need to get it even lower. So as we talked about earlier, we want to avoid dietary cholesterol. Your body makes all the cholesterol it needs for human functioning and essential cell development, but we don't need to eat it. The number one source of cholesterol in the American diet, chicken and cheese and eggs. I'm sorry, eggs are number one. Second to eggs are chicken and cheese. Very high sources of cholesterol. Okay, one egg can have anywhere from 180 to 220 milligrams of cholesterol for one egg yolk. It's not in egg whites, just it's only in the egg yolk. So something to be mindful of: if you're eating 3 eggs a day, you're getting a significant amount of cholesterol before you even start your day. At the very beginning of your day, you're getting that cholesterol. So it's best to avoid it. We also want to avoid trans fats. Trans fats come in a lot of processed foods, come in a lot of fast foods. And so what we need to be mindful of is these are some things that we need to avoid. So the more unprocessed plant-based foods we eat, the lower amount of trans fats we will possibly eat. And then saturated fats. Saturated fats come from animal products, but they also come from certain food sources and certain oils. So I'll give you an example here. So saturated fats, you get a lot from animal products. You get a lot of saturated fat from dairy products. Okay, a significant amount of saturated fat in the American diet comes from cheese and dairy. But it's even in things like coconut oil. Coconut oil is the highest amount of saturated fat for any oil. It is a no-no. All right. Now, if you think about it, if you've ever seen a jar of coconut oil, it's not liquid. It's kind of like a pasty, thick substance. All right. And the reason being is because it's saturated. So much of it is saturated fat. And that's why it's solid at room temperature. Now, if you take a scoop of coconut oil and you heat it and you cook it, it's going to melt down, which that's a whole nother thing that we're not going to really dive into today. But you never really ever want to cook with oil. There's a lot of negative things that come with the chemical breakdown of oil. So if you ever want to eat it, if you had like oil and vinegar on a salad, that's better for you than frying something in oil or sauteing something in oil, because there's a lot of negative compounds that come from cooking of actual oil. We also want to, avoid all tropical oils. It doesn't matter whether it's soybean, peanut, olive oil, extra virgin olive oil. They are not healthy for the cardiovascular system. All right. It basically puts fat directly into your bloodstream. And the more fat we have in our bloodstream, the more it constricts blood flow and the more it obstructs blood flow. All right. We also need to eat well. Eating well consists of eating primarily unprocessed plant-based foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains. So for example, you might say, okay, whole grain, brown rice over white rice. Quinoa, you have buckwheat, oatmeal, all of those are examples of whole grain. If you're going to get bread, it's better to get a rye or a pumpernickel or 100% whole wheat bread. Those are whole grain versus a refined white, like Wonder Bread of sorts, which is kind of funny. Wonder Bread, I don't know if you remember, but they basically took traditional whole grain bread, they made it refined, which refined means to make better, but it's funny how we call refined foods, we call them refined foods, but really we're lessening the value. All right. So we refine it and then we enrich it. So we take away good things, the good, healthy things that come from grains, and then we enrich it with vitamins and minerals instead of just leaving it in there. So Wonder Bread, remember back in the day, a long time ago, they promoted Wonder Bread as a gift because they added these vitamins and minerals. Well, if they didn't process it, they were already in it. So it's kind of a catch-22 there. So aim for whole grains and then eat the beans, the peas, the legumes, the lentils, nuts, seeds, mushrooms. These are all really good things for us. All right. We also want to be mindful. We should be getting our fat from our vegetables, from our grains, from our beans. We don't need to add olive oil like we talked about. You don't need to be worried about fat. Fat is in almost all unprocessed plant-based foods. Very small amounts. But what if I told you that broccoli had fat? You might think I'm crazy. Fat is in everything, but it's in very low amounts. All right. And you naturally will get what you need. If you eat enough calories, you will get more than enough protein. You will get more than enough fat. You also want to keep the fiber high, like we talked about. We want to be physically active. here's a tip for that. Do something you enjoy. If you enjoy it, you'll do it. So pick something you enjoy. If you want to walk around your neighborhood or you want to garden for a few hours each day, whatever it is that you really enjoy, incorporate that into your life. Sleep. Sleep is essential. Our goal is 7 to 9 hours every night. Doesn't matter whether you're 70 or doesn't matter whether you're 20. Every adult should be aiming for 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. All right. And sleep, oftentimes we have a love-hate relationship. We want it, but sometimes we can't get enough quality of it, or we can't end our day early enough to get enough of it. All right. But it's something that we should make a priority. And consider this: we will sleep a third of our life. A third. So if we lived to 90 plus years old, we're talking 30 plus years of sleep. Something that we need. If we want to make the 2/3 of our awake life good, we need to prioritize the 1/3. And then lastly, we need to manage our stressors, and we need to be aware of what are the things that cause us stress, but what can we do to effectively cope with them and or take action. So if it's important and controllable, your job and your responsibility is to take action. If it's important but uncontrollable, your job is to accept and positively cope. All right, so these are the things that will set you up for success with lowering your blood cholesterol. But the best thing here, 100% hands down, if you were to pick any of these, stop eating cholesterol, period. After that, it would be stop eating saturated fats and trans fats. Okay, after that, then you might say, all right, well, now start eating more of the oats and soybeans and things like that, because they also have another benefit for lowering your cholesterol even further. All right, here's a quick story of Kathy and Charles. In their late 70s and 80s, both of them switched to a primarily plant-based diet. Blood pressure improved, blood sugar improved, cholesterol improved. Everything got better. And it's just amazing that they are in their 70s and 80s and they're free of all medications. How many older adults can say that? Not many. I haven't met many older adults that can say that they have good metrics, good health, they feel good, and they're free of medications. All right, now blood pressure. So you're going to see some overlap here. Blood pressure is the amount of pressure on our heart when our heart beats and relaxes. So I don't know if many of you have heard this. Oftentimes we don't even ask our doctor what the number is or why. So basically, if you hear the 120 over 80, 120 is when your heart beats, 80 is when your heart relaxes. That's the pressure on the artery wall. So 120 is heartbeat, 80 is relax. 120 is beat, 80 is relax. That's essentially what that number is. So let's talk about some things that you can do. So you'll see everything we just talked about is pretty much very similar. Eating well, eating the rainbow, avoiding limiting animal products, but also moderating sodium intake. Here's a tip. Don't ever put salt on your food before you even taste your food. You ever seen anybody do that where they're putting salt on their food and they haven't even tasted it? It makes no sense. And I have some family members that do that, and I smile and chuckle every time. And every now and then I mess with them and tease them. But essentially, only add the amount of sodium you need. I don't want you to be afraid of sodium by any means. We need sodium. Sodium is a healthful thing that we need for a lot of physiological reasons. But the average American, we are getting way too much sodium. We are getting excessive amounts of sodium through our processed food. It's huge, significant source, but we are also getting it through animal products. Again, some of the most high sodium content foods, some of the most high sodium content foods are chicken and cheese. So you might think, well, why did chicken and cheese have so much? In the process of how they make it and process it, chicken, they're adding tons of water and sodium into it, and they're injecting it into it. And then on the dairy side, they're using it as in the process of making it. So the average American is getting excessive amounts of sodium from those two, but also from processed and refined foods as well. So think of it like this. The more sodium we have, the more water it pulls into our bloodstream. And the more water we have in our bloodstream, the more pressure it puts on the artery wall. So it's important that we understand that. We also, some other things to add here, hydration. Hydrating and keeping enough water in your day-to-day diet is important. So you might say, well, I'm eating a lot more fruits and vegetables, but I'm not drinking as much water. When you eat foods that contain water, you often can drink a lot less water. So the 8 ounce glasses that, they came up with back in the day, it was just from a presentation where they asked the presenter, well, what should people drink? You can't say that every single person should have 64 ounces of water. Everybody's different. Some people sweat a lot. Some people don't sweat. Some people are very active. Some people aren't. So we have to understand that it's situational and individualized. But bottom line, your drink of choice should be water. We also want to avoid caffeine. Caffeine can significantly affect our blood pressure. It drives up our caffeine. Some people, it might not do that. Oftentimes, we get used to it and that's okay. But typically it adds an elevated, it elevates our blood pressure a bit. Maintaining a healthy weight wasn't on the last one, but maintaining a healthy weight, again, think of how hard your engine is working when you're a Hyundai pulling a trailer. All right. So if we can unhitch that trailer and drive with the weight that Hyundai is supposed to have, it works much better. So we need to get to a healthy weight. And one of the best things to do is to avoid drinking any calories for a weight. Don't drink any calories. You don't need to drink anything of calories. Eat unprocessed foods, minimize or avoid refined foods, and keep the oils and the high calorie dense foods out or lessen them. We also need to avoid tobacco for our blood pressure. It constricts our blood vessels and it also hardens our blood vessels, which dramatically affect our blood pressure. And then drugs and alcohol are something we want to avoid and minimize. If it's something that you consume and that's part of your lifestyle and you choose to do that, that's certainly your choice. Everybody's given the gift of free will, but we need to be mindful that less is more when it comes to our drug and alcohol consumption. Now, stress, again, we talked about that. And then the addition here, sleep. We also talked about that. So let's talk about one more testimonial here. So this is the story of Linda. She was able to get off all of her blood pressure medication after 12 years of having high blood pressure medication. Twice a year, go to the doctor. Oh, let's check your meds. Let's check your blood pressure. It's genetic. We'll see in 6 months. Switching to a plant-based diet, off all medications, healthy blood pressure, no more pills. All right. So it's, again, we have to understand and we have to believe and we have to use other people's examples to really help us out. Now, the last one I want to cover here is optimal fasting blood sugar. So essentially that is when we eat, our food is broken down and metabolized, and that sugar enters our bloodstream as glucose. All right. So the glucose is sugar in our bloodstream. And what happens there is we use it. We use it for our brain. We use it for energy. It moves the sugar we process and use throughout our body. Now, what happens is when we don't use all the sugar, our body has a way of storing it. And it stores that sugar in our muscles as glycogen. So it stores it in our cells. So it basically, think of it like this. Your bloodstream is the checking account for your sugar and your glucose. The savings account is the muscle cells. That's the glycogen. That's what happens in a healthy person. When you eat tons of carbohydrates and you carb load, like for example, a lot of people would do this, they would carb load. Essentially what happens is it's storing all that extra sugar, that extra money in the savings account. Okay, but there's a problem that happens and causes us to have excess. So what we need to understand here is that when we think of high blood glucose, it's really about the fact that we're consuming way too much fat. Fat gets in the cell and it doesn't allow insulin from the pancreas to store the sugar in the cell. That's the problem. So people think that their blood sugar is elevated because they're eating sugar. It's not the case. It's elevated because their body is not storing the sugar in the muscle cells. That's the problem. It's not A equals B. It doesn't work like that with this. The only reason why it's high is because we are consuming higher fat diets and highly processed refined sugars. That's another thing too. We can't put sugars in the same category. We can't treat an apple or a bag of grapes like we would a candy bar. No, I'm sorry, they are not equal. You cannot compare those two things. One is high fat, high processed sugar, just completely engineered food. One is essentially really incredibly healthy, good for us, and naturally high in complex carbohydrates. Grapes don't cause diabetes. All right. We need to be mindful of that. Okay. So building off of the list, the only one that is on here that is not on the cholesterol and the blood pressure one is eat lower glycemic index foods. So now here's a couple examples. Now, these examples are for healthful foods, but for example, eating a sweet potato has a lower glycemic index than eating a white potato. So basically, the glycemic index means the sugar response, your blood sugar response after consuming a food. So if you had a study and you had this person eat a sweet potato, their blood sugar raises X. If they eat a white potato, it raises Y. That's called the glycemic index. So for a non-diabetic, you really don't have to worry about this, but we should be mindful that eating lower glycemic index foods can help. But if we keep the fat really low and we're eating mostly unprocessed plant-based foods, typically this is naturally going to work itself out. But for example, think of the bread example. If you add 100% whole wheat bread or you add rye bread, it's going to have a lower insulin load, lower blood sugar spike than that of eating, it's going to have lower than that of eating the Wonder Bread or the refined Italian bread or potato bread. It's going to have a better response. All right. So when we look at all these areas, it's important for us to consider we can lower our blood pressure, our cholesterol, and our glucose by changing our lifestyle. Hope is incredibly important for us. We have to understand that you can reverse these things. You can prevent these things. And I have the opportunity to work with a lot of students. And I always ask my students, tell me if you know any of your family members that have heart disease. And almost all of them raise their hands. And I tell them, I'm like, the information you will be learning throughout the semester, share it with them, encourage them, tell them that they can address these things and they can reverse them. One last testimonial here before we wrap up. So Stephanie and Bill, I had the opportunity to start working with them years ago. Stephanie basically was like, I'm doing it for Bill. And then she had a lot of incredible benefits as well. But his blood sugar came down, his A1C came down, all of his levels improved. And so it's important for us to understand that when we make changes, our body cleans up. This is one key takeaway I want you to understand, whether you're dealing with blood pressure, cholesterol, high blood sugar levels, or all of them, is when you start to address the cause and you undo some of these behaviors that you've done for 40 years or 70 years. When you undo it, your body naturally starts to heal. It's always trying to heal. Think of it like this with a smoker. A smoker, after every cigarette, a tobacco user, when they stop smoking, their body's trying to heal. Immediately following that last cigarette, let's say they go to bed, okay, their body's healing the entire night. And then wham, when they wake up in the morning, that first cigarette re-damages their body. So same thing happens when we feed ourselves, when we don't exercise, when we don't take care of our body. But we got to remind ourselves that the body is a self-healing machine. So again, we want to improve our sleep. We want to eat well, move more, stress less, strengthen our relationships, and avoid risky substances. This is really what we want to do. All right, because lifestyle is important and you can absolutely live better. I've never worked with a person, and I've worked with thousands of people through the years. I've never worked with a person that couldn't improve in some way, shape, or form. All right, so a couple of reminders here. Change is necessary, but it's also very important. You have to understand that you are making a commitment to change. Everybody that I meet, I don't work with. Everybody that is interested in health doesn't necessarily make the change. You have to be ready and willing to do it. You have to understand that change is possible. You have to believe in yourself and have what's called self-efficacy, your belief in your ability to accomplish something. When you believe in yourself and you start to set yourself up for success, you can do a lot of incredible things. So to wrap up, 12 months from now, what would a good 12 months look like for you? Where do you see yourself at the end of 12 months? Good blood pressure, good glucose, good cholesterol, active, eating really balanced and healthy, sleeping better, free of medications. What is it for you? What is it that you want? Because keep in mind, we can all strive to do these things. We can't ever check a box with our health and say, I've arrived, I'm good, I don't have to do anything else. It doesn't work like that. All right, so we need to understand that we can do it, but also understand what are some things that you are willing to change over the next 90 days. Are you willing to make sleep a bigger priority? Are you willing to address your stressors and figure out how you can respond and plan appropriately? Are you willing to change out your refrigerator? What's in it? Swap it out. Throw some stuff out, figure out how you can be more active. What is it for you that you would like to do? A couple of reminders here. We do have ways that we can work with you and support you if you're interested. We have a lot of different offerings. We have free challenges, free courses. We have some very affordable, low-cost courses as well. And we also have group coaching. So if this is something that you're interested, we are launching a new group coaching program that will start in February. So if there's anybody that you know or yourself that are interested, you can certainly go through and consider some of our offerings and see if this is something that we can help you out with. But I can tell you this, when it comes to cardiovascular disease, we have to change the conversation. We have to understand that we can do better. And not only can we do better, we deserve to do better. Because I can tell you this, when it comes to our health, we need to make health a priority. Those things that are prioritized in our life are the things that happen. And I'll leave you with this one quote. If you want to do something, fill in the blank, reverse my high blood pressure, prevent cardiovascular disease, whatever it is you want to do. If you want to do something, if you want to do it, you will find a way. If you don't want to do it, you will find an excuse. All right. So it's important for us to understand. And that is so true in all of our lives. I'm sure we can all agree to that. So what I'm challenging you to do today is find a way to make it happen and figure out where you are right now, but what you can do to really improve moving forward. That is my challenge to all of you guys. And I want to tell you that if any of you would like any support or have any questions or any further support or assistance needed, happy to support you guys in any way possible.